Seeing how everybody's got a 492 style machine, we'll concentrate on this one a little bit more. First thing that I would do before taking any knives out or doing anything is to sharpen them completely, get a good clean edge across the old knives. That'll give you a good starting point to set the new bar to, because that'll set everything square to the stone to where how it's going to sharpen in the machine. If you just back it out and do everything, it'll be fairly close, but the stone's kind of on its own plane, so if it's just a little bit off, then everything will kind of be out of whack a little bit. So I would recommend sharpening, whether it's 20, 30 cycles, to get them good and sharp. From there, I would put the new bar on and set the bar to the knife. So you have a little bit of fudging in the bolt holes. You can actually set the bar to the knife itself, and that'll be on that same plane. If before you back it out, I would pull one of the motors off one side, and if you don't have this tool, I'd recommend getting it. It's the manual adjuster. They'll kind of get out of whack a little bit because one side will be tighter than the other. You can just actually physically, manually back this out until you get to where there's no load on that. So it's not pulled to one side or the other. You can actually physically feel it pretty well in here too. If you look at here, let me pass a couple of these around. That's the trunnion that sits in here that that's running through. And you can see how it was pulled on there, and it's actually worn quite a bit. Here's just another example, not quite as drastic.
Just to clarify something too, every machine when it comes new has that tool included with it. So you know, the previous owner you have lost or whatever, they're still available, but you should have that tool. And show them the keyway maybe, Todd.
That is, I have this roll pinned on here
okay,
so that it won't fall off. There is a hole there, but what happens is that there's a key that keys the motor to it when you slide the motor off. There's just two springs that hold the motor on. You pull those two springs, slide the motor off. But the motor is keyed to the shaft. It's a little key. So if you slide the motor off and the little key's facing the bottom, it's down in the dirt and gone. So I'd recommend, if you're ever going to pull them off, to have a couple of spare keys just in the toolbox or whatever. Another thing too, as you're spinning it back and forth, there's a couple thrust bearings back in there. You can kind of feel the condition of those, make sure that it's not all tight and gritty or whatnot. But I would definitely check that first. Another thing to check when you have it all apart is your anvil, which the shear bar bolts down to. The top deck can get worn, wavy and stuff. Those can actually be machined, reflattened one time by not taking a whole lot off, 20 thousandths or so. And that can be reconditioned. If you do go to take it off, remind yourself to pull the wires off. As soon as you take those bolts out, loosen the eye bolts at the bottom, it'll want to fall forward and the wires will be the only thing holding it there. Make sure you take the wires off. Those are your knock sensors on the end of the bar. There's some little trunnion bearings sitting down in there. That's what that whole anvil rides on. You can clean those up, loop those up with some nose C's, get everything looped up. Through bolts or through pins here going through the eye bolt, those will get froze up. Take those apart, lube them all up, clean them all up. That'll help out a lot. There's a couple on the bottom there where this eye bolt goes through. There's a stack of these Belleville washers, and they're one other item to check. They'll be prone to cracking. So take a look at those, they'll end up cracking. Supposedly, it's going to go to a thicker one now. That's just what we found out yesterday when I was looking for some. so I'm not entirely sure. So you might, if you order these, you might end up getting new thick ones now instead of the thin ones.
You still use the same number of washers?
On the new machines, they just showed one big thick one. So it's still a little up in the air because I was just trying to get these yesterday and it was like I ended up with this and I was kind of curious why, but so I'm not entirely sure yet. But as on both machines, there's foam wedges that go behind that shear bar and halfway down into the anvil. Who hasn't done this at all yet? Who's got a machine that they haven't done? Everybody's done one? Okay, have you seen the foam wedges at all? The foam wedges don't look like much, but they are important. They will go, like I said, behind the shear bar here. You want them stuck up just a little bit, but what that's going to do is keep material from getting behind there and packing in. So when it does want to adjust in, it's got a cushion there that nothing can get in, so it can actually compress that foam instead of material being bound up behind there and not being able to compress that.
One thing to mention, Todd, while we're on it, what should we do if we don't need to deck that top there to put a new shear bar on?
You want to clean it, but don't sit there with a grinder buffer or whatever. I use like a flat board and some real fine emery cloth, and I just kind of flat it, deck it. You don't want to sit there and actually use an air tool or anything. Just get it nice and smooth by hand. No power tools required. So, like I said, get the preload off, back the shear bar out. You back the shear bar out using your CIS display. Most 492s, the later ones, I guess. Earlier ones are a little bit different, but on the later ones, you're going to turn the key on, turn the sharpening switch on. It's going to default to the sharpening side. You're going to cursor over one to the shear bar side and then push and hold that rocker switch again. You push and hold that rocker switch again, after 10 seconds or so, it'll beep at you, and you come out here and knock on that shear bar with a little hammer or whatever, and that'll back that bar out. Have you seen this before then? Okay, this is your gauge that you're going to set the shear bar to. This is going to sit up on that bearing block, and as you're tapping on it, that shear bar is going to come out in pulses. You're going to back it out until that gauge drops down in there, and then that's your starting point. Once you're backed out all the way, then you can go ahead and set the knife to the bar. You'll have some side-to-side play, and also, some slot holes going back and forth. It's kind of deceiving. I believe it's 60% of knife life. You're going to readjust. Does that sound right?
I'd have to look, Todd. It's been a while, but it sounds pretty close.
It's not. I would think when you set the knives, it would go down to 0%, but you're actually going to reset them at 60% to get the full life of the knife. If you went past that, this only has so much adjustment, and it's actually going to be all the way crammed back in. So it's a little deceiving, but if you want to reset it, it's about 60%.
If your CIS display is properly, if you use that properly to back it out and everything, it'll tell you that when that time comes.
Who wants to set a knife? Somebody that hasn't done it?
Brian right there does.
Okay. These are the half knives that we were talking about earlier. A little deceiving on these because we just normally had, before we had left knives and right knives. Now we have a left, and then a left, right. So there'd be four because they're staggered. So it's a little deceiving a little bit. So if you were to put them in, there is a certain spot for them. You got left, like I said, left, right, a right, left, and a right. So, we have a tool here that locks the cutting cylinder. That keeps it from spinning around and getting your fingers. I'd recommend using that. It should come with all the machines. And if you bought a used machine or something, might not have it, might want to look into getting it. It just is held in by the clamp that holds the feed rolls on. You just stick it in there and you can swing it back and forth. Makes it a little bit easier for torquing and stuff too, so that way it doesn't spin around.
So just to clarify, you guys, that most people aren't running those half knives like we're going to be setting here. You'll have a full knife there unless you're going to switch over and do some shredlage stuff. But the setting is very similar.
I'm assuming you're going to put the half knives on the other side also then.
Yeah, you'd put a complete
Because,
set in.
You'd probably feel it shaking in the cab.
Absolutely, yeah.
Would it be out of balance? It shouldn't.
Not
Yeah.
rotationally, it wouldn't, because you'd have even weight on both sides. I think that's correct. Does that make sense? Because rotationally, you'd be even on both sides, but you wouldn't be cutting right. You'd feel it.
You'd feel it in the cutting.
You would have more weight on that side because you got a half a knife more.
True. Yeah, side to side. We'll have to try it. Yeah. No.
With these ones, you have a lot of play going back and forth. As we're at the 494, it's just kind of held in place, and you just have a little bit of rocking motion. It's obviously going to be a lot easier to set this to a new bar because you're going to have a new square edge, but just for playing around here, we can do that. It's supposed to be a gap of about 0.2 to 0.3 millimeter from the knife to the bar. You can use a feeler gauge, get it side to side. Most guys, once they kind of get it figured out, you know, how close they want it to be, they got a pretty good feel for it. 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters, you roughly 10, 12 thousandths of an inch. So as long as you get it good and clear and even across, the more even that you set these to the bar, the less amount of strokes is going to take on the sharpening cycle, the first sharpening cycle, to touch the knives all the way across. It might, if you put new knives in and you sharpen, yeah, it might be sharp, but what's going to happen is if it doesn't touch all the way across evenly, you'll have bigger gaps because it's going to only adjust the shear bar to the highest point of the knife. So the closer that you can get it to even, the better you are. And that's why I would recommend sharpening them first, because that would put the knife and the stone on the same plane, and then you're going to set the new bar to the old knife on the same plane, and then you're going to set the new knife to the bar that's on the same plane, so everything stays in sync. If you just back it out, yeah, it might be close, but like I said, it's going to set it to the highest point, so it might take 100 cycles before it actually grinds completely and evenly all the way across. They might be sharp, but it's not going to be the same clearance to the bar.
Yeah, just to clarify, we don't go to the field until that stone touches every part of every knife. So the more accurate you are when you adjust those knives, the less work it's going to take afterwards. So take a little extra time. I see Lee shaking his head over there, so he's got experience. You know, first time, I mean, me and I'm sure Todd and everybody else, you sit out there and you wonder how many strokes. It takes a long time because that doesn't move real far each time that stone clicks down.
No. And you want it to grind from one side to the other. Like I said, it'll still be sharp. You know, even that's got a good edge on it, but it's not the same because you're not actually on the same plane. It'll only be hitting the high spots. You want it to grind completely.
When that knife dulls back and you do your 10 passes or 15 passes, it might not be sharpening that dull point if you went to the field before that happened.
With that being said, if it's not grinding all the way across and you do, like I said, it's going to set to the high spots, you have low spots, that's going to start wearing quicker because it's going to start pulling material through instead of cutting it. I mean, we're only talking a little bit, but it's going to still start to accelerate that wear. As you can see on some of those, if everybody wants to look at some of these, the bars, obviously lots of wear. New bar, good and square. That one's not near as bad, but obviously like that's washed out really bad. One of the other things on the back side of the anvil when you have it rocked out is this cast wedge. You can see on there how wore down it is and washed out. You can compare it to the new one. You can see sometimes it'll actually be almost see-through there. It'll wash out so bad. So that's another thing to look at when you have that anvil off is the cast wedge.
How far is too far gone when you have to replace it?
Well, I've seen some that you start right here where that indentation is. It's actually wore through there. You could actually see through that.
If you get to that point.
You get to that point. I mean, it's paper thin because that's a little bit thicker here, and it's that little indentation there. You can actually see through it, and that's obviously way wore out. But even this one here, you can feel that it's getting down there. One of the other things on the shear bar too is, and we can look on the back of those feed roll set that we have there, the smooth roll scraper. That scraper is on the same plane as the shear bar. So if you took these two, for instance, and you set them side by side, you basically, roughly, you have a smooth plane. If that smooth roll scraper wears out, your new bar can actually be higher. The front edge will be higher than that plane coming in there. So if it's got a big washout in the valley, the front edge of the shear bar that's not being used will actually wear out because it doesn't have a smooth transaction. It'll have a little bit of a lip there, so that feed's kind of running over the top. You'll actually wear out the front side quicker than the back side. So if you want to take a look here real quick. You want to come around to this side.
Ryan, hop in there and look at that smooth roll scraper. That's real important for you. The new guys, couple of new guys.
This is your smooth roll scraper. It's held in by 2 bolts on each
Bradley.
end, and it's pushed up tight to that smooth roll. When I say tight, I mean just up to it. You don't want it forced in there, but you don't want it to actually be back away. You want it up to the smooth roll. But that is on the same plane as the bar. So what happens is, and I think Mark's got one sitting over there, is this is obviously drastic, but if you picture that line there on this, it will wash out, as that feed's coming across. Once this is lower than that, you put a new shear bar on, it's going to be running feed into right there instead of over the top of it, and you'll actually wear out the front side of a brand new bar before.
First time to turn it around.
Yeah. So when you're doing knives and all that stuff too, take a look at the scraper because it's just as important. Like I said, there's 2 bolts holding it on each end, and you just push it up to the roll and tighten the bolts. You don't want to force it on there because you'll have too much friction, and if you have it too far back, material will actually go behind it and cause friction. You'll actually, once you take it off, if it's wore, you'll see a bunch of burnt little stuff in there because it's actually sitting in there just smoldering almost because that stuff's pushing behind there and just causing friction and actually kind of turns black and smoldery and stuff. So, good thing to pay attention to.
Got it too tight, it'll peel that smooth roll like a lathe, too.
Yeah.
Found that
Yeah.
out.
So it's kind of an easy touch there, I guess you'd say. You want it in there up against it, but you don't want it jammed in there, and you don't want it too far back. So basically, just up into it and then tighten the bolt.